In this tutorial, we're going to look at the tools that are inside of the File menu at the top of the screen, inside of Photoshop. We'll look at the things within those menus that we'll be using to finalize our images and save them as JPEGs. The images I'll be using for this tutorial are located on the Google Drive. Go into the Video Tutorials folder, inside of the Photoshop Tutorials folder, and there is a folder called Image Files. Download that to the machine you're working on so you can quickly access these images and use them to follow along with the tutorial. We'll start by looking at the Photoshop filters we'll use. For this section of the tutorial, make sure you've opened up the photo of Turkish the turkey walker. One of the first things I do to almost every image I process is to add some sharpening even after I've added clarity in the Camera Raw processor. If I look down at the turkey's feathers here, there's definitely some detail, but I think we can get a little more out of this. I'm going to go up to the File menu, select Filter by clicking and holding down, and I'm going to navigate down to Sharpen, and then I'm going to select Unsharp Mask. I'm going to move this window over here. Make sure you have Preview selected. Depending on the camera's resolution and the output size of your Camera Raw file, you may need to use slightly different settings than these. This is a relatively large file, so I'm going to use a slightly higher radius than 1 pixel. I'm going to set it to 3. I can also, using this preview window here, adjust the slider, and when I let go I can see both in the main image and the preview how much sharpening is being applied. I'm going to move that slider until I think I've gotten enough detail out of the image. Once I've gotten that, I can hit OK. Now the three things to look at are the amount of sharpening, the radius, and the threshold. As you increase the sharpening, you can start to get pixelization. Adjusting the threshold will allow you to increase the amount and still keep it from getting that pixelization. So you'll need to adjust these three sliders until it looks good to you. Hit OK, and the sharpening is done. I've increased the view of the Turkish image, and I've increased the digital noise in the image by applying a very heavy unsharp mask filter to it. This is so we can see how to use the reduce noise. Now generally we'll be reducing noise from images that were shot in low light. Go up to the filter menu, scroll down to noise, and you'll have some choices here. We're going to click on despeckle. Once we click on that, if you look in the area of the pants, in this area here, you'll see that some of the little white speckles that showed up as artifacts have been removed. By undoing it, by hitting Command Z, I can see the white speckles, and if I reapply, it's taken them out. Now when you do this, you may lose some sharpness to your image, but this is a way to try and remove some of that digital noise if you find yourself shooting in low light. Next, we'll look at some of the adjustments we can make to an image using the brightness contrast tool and adjusting levels or curves within our image. To use these three tools, we go up to the File menu and click on Image. Next, we'll scroll down to Adjustments, and you can see we have brightness contrast, we have levels, and we have curves. We'll start with brightness and contrast. It'll open this dialog window, and as with all of these, when we're making adjustments, make sure you click on the preview option so you can see what changes are being made to your image. When you're first learning brightness contrast, levels, and curves, all of them have an auto feature. You can click on that to see what Photoshop thinks is a good starting place for your image. In this case, it thought the image was a little bright overall and it needed a little less contrast. This is a good way to see how the sliders work and how they impact your image. You can also manually adjust these. I can increase the brightness or decrease the brightness, or I can decrease or increase the contrast of the image. Contrast is the separation between the darkest and brightest areas of an image. Increase the contrast and you increase the separation between the dark and bright, making shadows darker and highlights brighter. So I'm going to hit cancel on this because I don't want to save these changes. This is just to show you how to use this tool. We'll look at levels next. Again, go up to Image, go to Adjustments, and you can see with levels we actually have a keyboard shortcut, Command L. Either click on levels through the File menu or pull it up by hitting the Command and L keys. It will pull up a dialog box similar to the one we saw before. In this case though, it includes a histogram area. That's this box right here. And what it shows is how much information in the image falls into the shadows category, how much information falls into the midtones, and how much falls into the highlights area. The arrow on the left adjusts the shadows, the arrow in the middle adjusts the midtones, and the arrow on the right adjusts your highlights. Again, make sure you have Preview selected, and we're just going to hit Auto for now to see what level adjustments Photoshop would make. By hitting Command and Z, I can see what minor changes Photoshop has made when I hit Auto on the levels. It's a subtle change, but it's added a little bit of darkness and a little bit of contrast to the image. I can now hit OK to save those changes, or I can hit Cancel or push the Escape key to not accept the changes made in Photoshop. Levels also comes with some built-in presets. Playing around with these will give you a good idea of how the tool itself works. You can access them by clicking up here next to Preset, and you can look and see some of the options here. So we can make our midtones brighter, and you'll see it's moved the midtone slider to the left, or we can make our midtones darker, and you'll see it moves the midtone slider to the right. This is a good way to see what kinds of things levels can do, by seeing how the different sliders are adjusted using the different presets. To show you how curves work, let's go ahead and switch to the image of the logging conference. Go ahead and pause it now and open that image. Once you've done that, you can resume. To open the Curves Adjustment window, go up to the File menu, go to Image, scroll down to Adjustments, and select Curves from that menu. We could also use the keyboard shortcut, Command and M. Go ahead and select Curves. That'll bring up the Curves Adjustment window. In the main window, you'll see a thing that looks just like the histogram and levels, but there is a big difference between how levels works and how curves works. This diagonal line is a visual representation of all of the tones in your image. Now it's important to know that that's how we can adjust things. So you can see we have a lot of dark and shadows in this image, and we don't have a lot of highlights. Like levels, Curves has sliders at the bottom of the histogram, but I only have two. I have the one for highlights, and I have the one for darks. To add contrast to an image using Curves, I can slide the black slider to the right and the highlight slider to the left, and that will add contrast. I'm going to move these back so we can actually look at how we make changes on the line itself. Just to start with, this is the center point of the image, so this should cover most of the midtones. If I click on that line and drag it up, it's going to increase the brightness in the midtones. And conversely, if I pull it down, it's going to darken the midtones. Now I'm going to put this back to the middle, and I'm going to show you how we can manipulate specific areas. If I want to figure out which part of the line to begin my manipulation, I can do a really cool thing. I can hold down the Option key and then click on a point in the image using the eyedropper tool, which you'll see here. But if I slide it around, you'll notice the circle on the line moves, showing me what part of the tonal range this part of the image falls on. So if I go down here where it's really dark, you'll see it falls down into the shadow part of the histogram and the lower part of the line. If I go up into the clouds, you'll see it goes up to where the white part of the histogram is, or the highlights are. If I want to affect just one portion of the image, I select a point on the line that falls in that tonal range. Let's say I want to lighten the area where the man's face is. I can select a point down here low on the line, closer to the blacks, and click and pull that up. Now I need to click and hold to make these adjustments. But you can see the clouds are relatively unaffected, but I've definitely lightened the face. If I want to remove that change, I can click on the point and pull it out of frame. I'm going to move this window down so we can see some of the presets that Curves offers us. For example, if I click on the preset window, I can do a linear contrast, which is going to just slightly affect the line. I can do a medium contrast, which you can see will affect the line more. And I can do a strong contrast. This will give you a way to look at how the line gets manipulated and how you can use that to control the tonal range in your image. If I want to remove changes made by the preset, I simply click back in the preset menu and click on Default, and that will take away the changes. There's one last tool Curves offers us to really help us learn and understand how it works. Down here you'll see a little hand with two arrows next to it. By clicking on that, I can go and select an area with the eyedropper tool that I want to adjust. Let's say these shadows in the barrel. And if I click and drag up, I can lighten the image or I can darken the image. This gives us a quick and easy way to actually work with a specific point on the line by choosing it with the tool. I'm going to hit Escape to close that window and not accept any of the changes. But this should give you a good idea of how to use levels or to use curves to adjust the tonal range in your image for your final processing in Photoshop.